His last year hadn't been great. He had been active and energetic his whole life, and it had become difficult just to walk out of the house. The summer here had come and gone in a blaze of forest fires, some of the largest in the country. Your ride-up took you through mile-long stretches of blackened timber. Even the early snow couldn't make the bare and broken leaves look better, and he hadn't been able to help. You'd rather conjure him up in front of the market in his Santa Claus suit, teasing and poking the kids, or better still, beside you out on that frozen lake while his buddies cut the hole in the ice for the fishing lines, elbowing you to pour an extra dollop of your coffee. They had caught a ton of trout that day, and just got drunker as coffee ran out, but the whiskey didn't. By afternoon, the light had faded to a soft glow, and the light, silent snowfall began and continued endlessly until their whole group seemed frozen in time. You had never known how the snowflakes could fall and surround your soul like that. How would you like to go back and do one of those days over? That was all said and done for him, and you weren't sure you were supposed to feel bad or not. Somehow, when you reached the house, you were still wrapped in that light shower of snowflakes you had remembered, and you felt insulated and numb. You hugged your mother and sister, looked into their brave faces, and drifted away to nibble at the food set out at the dining room table. You knew most of these people. You had come every Christmas. The warmth of the wood-burning stove and the long flight had you feeling giddy, and you started a shaggy dog story about an old car you drove across country when you were 20, and these guys listening were beginning to laugh a little too loudly. Your mother and her friends looked, and you realized you probably shouldn't be making people laugh. It all felt out of place and awkward then. No children or a wife to draw your attention, no catching up on all the little things, no falling asleep after dinner in front of the television. You stepped outside to the cold air and played with the dog for a moment. The coolness awakened you, but you still didn't feel anything. You'd have to return inside shortly because they were preparing to go to the funeral service with and without you. There was no way not to go. Al himself would ask with that pretend hurt that he could muster and accuse you of not caring. So you went back and joined your mother and sister and the neighbor lady in her crowded little car, and after a quick drive, piled out in front of the white clapboard chapel. The service was full of hellfire and brimstone just the way he would have liked it. You climbed the snow-covered hill outside and watched the pallbearers slowly bring up the casket, and you were certain one of them was going to fall, but no one did. The coffin had remained closed throughout, and beside the open grave, you wonder if he was really inside the damn thing. It just didn't seem real. The VFW Honor Guard fired their salute. They were almost comical, all very old men and one of them drunk. Your mother clasped your hand while the minister said his words, and then it was over. People began leaving. You almost expected Al to be standing at the back of the dispersing group, chewing thoughtfully on his unlit cigar and watching the faces of his mourners as they trudged off through the snow. The neighbor has brought her car up, so you walked your mother over and she climbed in the back seat and asked to wait while they lowered the coffin. You squatted beside her outside the open car door. Your mother's eyes were flooded with tears. You made a stupid comment about how being put in a box in the ground is a lonely business, and your words cut her to the quick and she let go of your hand. You weren't able to share her grief. All you felt was the wretchedness of being put away like him, that everyone you had ever held close to your heart would leave you here forever, alone in the cold ground. Snow was falling again on the hilltop, and you did leave him. The house was quiet and empty when you returned. Everyone had left. Even the lady who had driven you didn't want to get out of her car. Your sister cleaned up, and your mother, who was looking old and worn, stretched out on the couch and promptly fell asleep. You found a blanket to cover her. You looked at your sister through the kitchen door, and she stopped and looked back. There was nothing to say. There was nothing to do. You gave her that little bye-bye wave, which was a 30-year-old way of saying goodnight, and you climbed the stairs to bed. You had been prepared to find Al in your dreams. Someone, perhaps your mother, had told you when you were small that the dead come back to say goodbye that way, and for most of your life they had. Al never arrived. Instead, you dreamed of Stacy, and jolted awake at 2, chilled in sweaty sheets. You couldn't remember any of the dream except the image of Stacy's hand clawing at the loose dirt. Then you understood. You had your excuse. If Al was to get to heaven, then Stacy had to be redeemed. Stacy would yank him back and yank you back when your time came. You didn't believe in any of this, and if pressed, you'd probably say there wasn't a God, but certainly no heaven or hell. But you'd be damned before you'd screw it up for Al. You got up and went downstairs to sit at the kitchen table with a glass of milk and the telephone, and you made your calls while worrying that the light would wake your mother, who was still on the couch. You tracked down the numbers through information and finally reached Pace at his breakfast table in Indiana. Then reservations had to be made for the flight. You didn't call your wife in Los Angeles. It was the middle of the night there, and the ringing might scare the kids. She would talk you out of it anyway. You couldn't think of the ramifications, like going to jail. You were that 12-year-old boy again, wanting to tell someone, anyone. You needed to fan the ember of immortality of God that was decomposing out there with Al on the hill. You needed to fan your own, whether you believed in it or not. You believed that night. And it wasn't until you were in the air the next day that you began to have doubts. In your window seat on the crowded plane, you were desolate as Al was in death. No one could touch you. You dozed and awakened unrested and gazed at the mountains below in the sunlight. You had always scoffed at the notion of God. It was just one of those many unknowable things. Look at the drunk in the VFW honor guard who had fired a salute at the funeral. He had stumbled and fussed with his rifle, and twice during the last words seemed to melt from sheer drunkenness. You were sure he would soon topple over. Each time he managed to shake himself back to consciousness. You think he understood God? He was barely treading water like the rest of us. It was hard enough to stay lucid, particularly if you were the son of a schizophrenic. Even at 40, you were still putting your hand out to verify what was real, just to make sure. Who had time for God? And if there wasn't a God, then why confess? To dispel secrets that might grow into something that would never be real. The 2 men beneath the tree had stopped digging. Dislodging a small tin box, one of them carried it back to where you were standing with Pace. The box was a brown cookie tin decorated with circus animals. You had forgotten it would be there. Pace motioned for it to be handed to you, and you opened the lid. There was a plastic bag of photographs. Inside, on top of the stack, was a photograph of your sister blowing out candles on her 10th birthday. Your entire family was in it except for your father, who always took the pictures. It was taken in April of that last year. You had all gone to a little park in the bottom of the hill behind your grandfather's body shop. Everyone was dressed warmly. Your grandmother and your sister in sweaters, your brother and you in windbreakers, your grandfather in that cracked leather flight jacket, and your mother in her university sweatshirt. Because of the flash, the surrounding trees were dark, making it look like night had fallen. But you remember being there in the early evening. You didn't look at the rest of the pictures. What would be revealed was a young boy looking forward to the long evenings the coming summer and his 13th birthday in August. The photos would show smiles that were lies. These were images taken by your father's camera and framed by his eye, and that made them forgeries. You had no other visual record of your childhood, and you would burn them if you could. You've got the right spot, you told Pace. He's only a few inches deeper. And it's called It Knows You by No Other Name by Dan McNay.